Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can. Hello.
Hi there.
How you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Doing pretty great. Here, let me tilt your volume up just a little bit. Um, there we go. Here, wait. Let's do some sweet mic testing. Here, just give me a sentence. Hit me with it.
Can you hear me? I
Yeah,
suppose this is a one, two.
yeah, I can hear you just fine. When you're using push to talk, make sure to keep your the key pressed for like a half second before you speak and up to a half second afterwards, or it'll get clipped off at the beginning and end.
So, to like just in case of latency, you mean?
Yeah, yeah, especially since you're across the pond.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense.
All right. Hey, hit us up. Introduce yourself to the class. How you doing?
Hi. I'm Sarah Charles. I'm doing a PhD in the psychobiology of social bonding, which is possibly a bunch of nonsense to people who don't know what that means. So, just a bit of understanding. Psychobiology is sort of a mix between psychology, neuroscience, and biochemistry. So, I'm interested in the chemicals of the brain that are released during certain behaviors. That's sort of what psychobiology is. And the behaviors I'm interested in are to do with social bonding and social behaviors.
Fantastic. And specifically, when you emailed me, I was delighted to see that email because you specifically were interested in talking about bonding and social atomization, alienation, and stuff. And I think it was specifically with regards to a conversation. I could be misremembering here, but it was specifically in regard to a conversation I had had on incels, because I guess that's sort of an ongoing topic that I have. There's no denying that people are getting lonelier. In our society, and there are a whole lot of people who are very interested in discussing ways to sort of ameliorate those problems. And it's nice to have a aforementioned big brain alpha researcher around to kick us about. You're from England, yes?
Yes, I'm from London originally, and I'm studying in Coventry, which is in the middle of the UK. It's in the middle of England.
Gotcha. Okay, how's the Majora's Mask Brexit moon slowly approaching the UK?
Oh,
How's that settling in your
it's
stomach?
terrible. Yeah, it's I as a fairly left-leaning person like yourself, I find the idea of free movement of people to be a good idea, and I think it is a shame that not only that, but economically and all sorts of troubles are going to be caused by the lies and I guess issues that were promoted by people, both mostly on the right, but across the political spectrum.
Yeah. Just a fair warning. On account of Brexit, Boris Johnson, your entire media in general, and Sargon of Akkad, we in my community are actually racist against British people. So if there's any blowback whatsoever, I apologize for the deep-seated Anglophobia that has infiltrated my community. It is not fair, but we are strong and we will rise above it. Okay, together.
I mean, they'll be happy to know that I'm not, I suppose, originally British. If you go back, much like family came originally from across waters, and so if you go back a few generations from Belgium and Poland, so not dissimilar to.
Oh, that's good. Okay, because we're ethnically racist, not nationality basis. So that's good. You're spared the axe then. Okay, but to get to it then. So I talk about so I'm going to be framing this mostly with regards to. I assume you're familiar with like incels as a broader topic of online discourse.
Yes, I am familiar with incels. So when I first emailed you,
Mhm.
it was actually mostly based on what you were speaking about loneliness and your takes on loneliness and what might be causing it, the social atomization side of what you speak about. So when you framed it as about incels, I'm perfectly happy to do so, but that was not what I had in mind. But honestly, as soon as you started framing it that way, I can happily go into that.
No, no, loneliness in general. I mean, the two subjects overlap so heavily. It's relevant, one way or another. So So on my stream, I've talked about these issues before, sort of broadly from a more like populist, anti-capitalist perspective, where I believe that social atomization and alienation from our culture is a product of capitalism, which makes people feel like it's harder and harder to make friends, which it absolutely is, and it makes it harder and harder for people to form meaningful relationships because everything is being sort of commodified, and our culture is being sort of eaten away by the profit monster. And we've talked about this pretty extensively, I think, though obviously not from the angle that you engage in your research in. And up until this point, I mean, my advice, at least on an individual level, to anyone who may be suffering with these issues, has been like a fairly, I think, banal, fairly placid, like, yes, this is a product of broader social issues. However, individually, there are things that we can do. And I think it would be nice if we could get sort of a more, a different, maybe less sociologically inclined systemic angle at this. So with that in mind, hit me with your thesis on this. You've obviously studied it much longer than I have.
Sure. So I was actually not going to jump straight into this in my head. I was going to sort of give a background.
Oh no, please, no, please, please. The foreplay only makes the inevitable thesis far more impactful. Go for it.
Brilliant. Well, I'm fairly used to giving lectures, to both undergrad and master's level students. So if I kind of continue talking, feel free to butt in at any point in time because I will just keep on going.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I've been known to talk quite quickly. I'm actively trying to slow myself down, but if I get excited, I might speed back up. So again, if I'm talking quickly, ask me to slow down, and I will.
Gotcha. They've gotten used to me. I'm sure they'll find a way to manage.
I'll say I'm used to you on times 2 speed because I tend to watch everything on times 2 speed via YouTube. So yeah, that's sort of my go-to normal speed. So once again, I'm trying to slow myself down, but if I do start speeding up, let me know.
Of course, go for it.
Yeah. So my main idea was to sort of introduce the topic of what social bonding is and break that down into kind of the protective factors of social bonding. And firstly, how it works, which is what my research is, then why that's important, and then I was going to talk about how that can be sort of part of why it's important is about the mental health aspects of social bonding, both the protective factors of social bonding itself, and also how loneliness can lead to mental health issues. Then I was going to sort of bring that into the capitalism and social atomization topic, and from there lead into incels. So how does that sound to you?
That sounds perfectly fine to me. I'll jump in if I feel I have something particularly salient to say. Just so you know, up until this point, my broader sort of advice on this subject has been that if anyone suffers with loneliness, they can buy my book on Amazon, which is Defeating Inceldom the Vosh Way, 100 Tips to Reclaim Your Masculinity for 3 segments of $9.99 each. So if you could occasionally bring it back to the precepts listed in that book, that would be it'd be a good plug,
Only 110 tips. Jeez.
If you could add any, I could write another one.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just get started. So first of all, it's important to understand sort of the role of social bonding. So it's kind of evolutionarily speaking, really important. We're not the fastest animals in the world, we're not the strongest animals in the world, but what we do really well is live together in groups, cooperate, and converse. These are social technologies that we've created to help our species evolve. And this provides huge benefits on a group level. You've got better child rearing, efficiency, food gathering. You're protected from being hunted by predators, and so being able to cooperate is fantastic. But then you've obviously got the individual benefits, which a lot of people sort of aren't aware of, where you've got kind of protective factors against depression. You've got protective factors against mental health issues other than depression as well, so schizophrenia as well. You've got protective factors against general immune deficiencies.
So this is all in like the sort of default biological template that humans are built from. This is like this would have been like hunter gatherer days, right? Like back when we were living pretty true to our sort of instinctual roots.
Oh yeah, so like this is evolutionary kind of area. We're not talking about this is pre and before 11,000 years ago when we started to group up. This is definitely hunter gatherer vibe.
Hmm.
So one of the things that's really interesting to understand is that loneliness itself is actually kind of analogous to hunger. I think is a good way of thinking about it. It's an evolutionarily speaking advantageous way of telling your body or telling yourself that, I'm currently not getting the social connection I need. Go and get it.
Hmm.
The same way hunger is like, I'm not getting the food that I need. Go and get it. And so short-term loneliness is actually evolutionarily speaking advantageous. However, chronic loneliness, much like if you were to go too long without food,
Right.
you kind of obviously don't die, but too long without social interaction, and you really do start to have negative health impacts on your body. So there's I don't really know where to start, but what I'll do is I'll probably break down social bonding into sort of three aspects. You've
Hmm.
got the social support, which is having people who you're bonded with, so friends and family that can support you in a healthy way. So you can go to and emotionally kind of vent with them, or you can just have a laugh with them. And these supportive things have protective factors against stress. So if you're in a stressful environment, that by itself can really stop a lot of the mental health
Yeah, of
things
course.
with stress.
The thing I'm most interested in, I guess broadly, is sort of a descriptive analysis of where our society is currently failing us in regards to the ability to meet these biological needs that we have, and descriptively what can be done to sort of alleviate those issues. So so it may well be, for example, that there's the access to certain social resources can be immensely helpful to people who are experiencing chronic loneliness, and that's all well and good. But obviously, a lot of people don't have those resources. A lot of people don't have friends, they don't have loved ones, they don't have good relationships with their families, or they might not even have families at all. A lot of LGBTQ youth are kicked out of the house young. For groups like this, obviously can be enormously difficult to meet any of the hardline requirements for a sort of healthy social situation. And I'm interested in sort of your perspective on what can be done about the situation as it exists today.
And as it exists under a capitalist system, it becomes quite difficult because of the very nature of the beast is that you wake up in the morning, you go to work, you come home to your own four walls, usually quite isolated, and you haven't already got friends. It becomes quite difficult to go and find friends if you're not friendly with people who you work with.
Hmm.
There are ways of trying to remedy the situation. If you like a particular hobby, so be it for me, it's board gaming and music. But for other people, it can be a sport of some kind. It can be a book club. It can be whatever it is that floats their boat.
Yeah,
Go
I feel like for
other.
most people, it's just jobs. That's the only place they get anything, like after school, after you're done with school, I feel like for a lot of people, it's just work. And at work, you're discouraged from being friends with your coworkers, and God willing, if you get like a relationship going at a workplace, like they make it difficult for you.
So I think that might be where societal differences come in. That may be the case in the States. In the UK, at least where I've worked in the past, before I was doing PhDs and stuff like workplace relationships, not necessarily, intimate relationships or anything like that, but in terms of just kind of pleasantries, definitely were encouraged. But I think also there needs to be a distinction made between isolation and loneliness, because they are distinct things, right? One can be physically alone and not feel lonely, and vice versa. One can be surrounded by people and feel incredibly alone.
Yeah, yeah, undeniably. I think it also depends on where you work, most like retail jobs, for example, or or when you work at restaurants. In my experience, friendships are usually sort of passively discouraged there because time that you take when you're working to sort of bond with your coworkers, which is kind of like the natural time you would do so. That's how you get your foot in the door with friendships. Is time that you're not sort of optimizing your engagement with the workplace environment. Obviously, relationships are discouraged in almost any workplace environment. Um, but yeah, and it can be difficult to like hang out after work with your coworkers because a lot of people have multiple jobs or they've got kids to take care of. So it feels like you get this one window around other people, this brief, fleeting interaction with other human beings, and then like you get pulled away. You don't even get a chance because the boss is always watching, manager watching, that kind of stuff.
For sure. So that's where the kind of capitalism comes into it. So a lot of people don't know this, but kind of the term loneliness sort of only came into existence in terms of it seemed to have been first been coined around the early 1800s at the start of the Industrial Revolution. Before that, there was a kind of an idea of oneliness, but that's being literally alone by oneself physically, not feeling alone. And so loneliness sort of only happened when people started moving to cities, doing factory jobs, long days, not really having a social life. And there are many reasons for that. But one of the main reasons that is given by both psychologists and social scientists is something to do with the work by Robin Dunbar. So Robin Dunbar was talking about sort of these certain numbers, these thresholds that you hit of the number of people that you can feel close to. And there's multiple levels. So there's sort of 5 people who are incredibly close to you, give or take 1 or 2, 50 people, then 50 people, and then 150 people. Yeah. And it's really important to kind of have these different levels. So the 5 people might be your partner, one of your best friends, and your mother, and I don't know, your sister, whatever it is. But people tend to have 4, 5, or 6 people in their incredibly close knit that you can tell anything to, and you wouldn't be afraid to do anything with. Then, like the next 15 is sort of your really close friends, the people you'd be happy to cry in front of, but you wouldn't necessarily embellish your deepest, darkest secrets with. Mm-hmm. Then you've got like the 50 people who are people you wouldn't be afraid to invite to a dinner party or a birthday party, but you wouldn't necessarily consider them really close friends. And then the 150 people is sort of this larger mass of people who you can happily have a conversation with, but they're sort of kind of your kind of just friends as opposed to people that you see all of the time.
Right.
And what happens is people can feel lonely at any of these levels. It's not just general loneliness. You can feel lonely. You can have loads of friends in the 150 category and a bunch of people in that 50 category.
But not have like those really, really close friends that sell. And likewise, you can have you can have like a little small nugget of close friends, but you want those sort of casual interactions with people that you have less of a mutual investment in.
Correct, yeah. So something that people often miss is that you are either lonely or you're not. When it's not an on or off thing, it's kind of, it is very much a kind of scaled thing. Now, one of the things about loneliness is that it can really quite heavily lead to depression. It's quite predictive of depression, and also seems to have a role in various immune functions. So part of this whole analogous thing to hunger that I was talking about is that it activates your stress hormones, and it sort of puts you into fight or flight mode that you've probably heard of.
Yeah, doesn't loneliness literally kill people? I remember reading something about one of the imagined reasons why men tend to die earlier, not just because of respective biologies, it's also because they have a harder time finding social bonds, which means a lot of them, their lifespans are hastened just because they're lonely. That people tend to die often after their partners die as well. That loneliness is an actual physiological killer of people if it stretches on too long.
So this is what I was talking about so loneliness activates your fight and flight response, and so it's basically causing stress on your body. And so chronic stress has been long known to be a problem because it forces your immune system to kind of be working overtime to try and deal with the chronic stress. And if you're having immune deficiencies, then that can lead to a whole host of kind of downward problems, be it an immune disorder, pain disorders, because your immune, if you're inflamed, then you're more likely to feel pain. It can lead to all sorts of issues that kind of downstream from the loneliness. And it doesn't surprise me at all that if people are lonely, I think there's a study by a researcher called Holt Lunstad. She's a neuroscientist in America, and they did a meta-analysis of all of like a bunch of loneliness research, and they found that loneliness is actually a better predictor, or you're more likely to die, basically, if you are lonely than you are if you are smoking 15 cigarettes a day for the whole of your life.
You hear that, chat? You can light up. You've been given carte blanche. A lot of you are already that way, that far down the road. You know. Yeah. So not having friends is basically like having HIV. Is what you're saying?
Not quite as bad as HIV, but it definitely compromises your immune system in some fashion. You know, or at the very least, it changes your physiology. And often, unfortunately, this can have sort of a cyclical effect where it also puts you in a hypervigilant state because you've got this fight or flight response. And so if you're there for too long, what will happen is instead of, if you're interacting with someone, you're hypervigilant for social cues. Mm-hmm. And you might even be primed to think that when someone is doing something entirely neutral, perceiving it as a negative. So almost enhancing the fact that you kind of came away from the situation feeling bad about bonding with that person.
Yeah, and this probably isn't even counting the fact that suicidality increases with loneliness, and that's its own inhibitor of long lifespans. So yeah, all right. It's probably pretty bad to be lonely. What do we do about that?
Yeah. So in terms of within a capitalist system, mm-hmm. I suppose the best thing that one can do is try as best they can to kind of go out and find others who have similar interests. I think the problem inherent in capitalism is that, especially in the modern day, not even in the 1800s, in the modern day, you find that people move around a lot. So you might go grow up all your life up until you're 18 in one small village or one small town, depending on the country you live in, and then suddenly, especially in the UK and America, you're highly encouraged and highly incentivized to go to university. And often that's in a different state for the US, or a different city entirely in the UK, and the same, or sometimes in a different country.
Yeah, people move around all the goddamn time. I mean, so the people who move around the most, I mean, I know there are kids who move around a lot because their parents are always moving military bases. That's always a really big one. But more broadly speaking, I feel like there's a very little respect for the comfort and permanence of like a hometown. And now, obviously, a lot of the reason why people move around so much these days is because they're looking for jobs. Work, shifts around. If you go to university, you get into a particular field. Very often, if you're actually looking for work in your field, you're going to have to move. I mean, it's not easy unless you're like highly in demand. Like if you're a nurse and you're already in a big city, for example, you're probably going to be able to find work. Maybe not the best work you could find in the country, but good work. Doctor, maybe engineer, maybe lawyer, maybe, but most professions you're gonna have to move around. And last, I feel like it's also exacerbated by the fact that most places are in at least here in the States. I don't know about the United Kingdom. Most people here in the places here in the States are dog shit. Absolute dog shit. Most of this country is a trash fire. That is unworthy of human time and attention. Do you get that feeling from the UK? I'm not memeing here, because there have been broader socioeconomic forces that really have made most places just horrible to live in.
I mean, from the UK, we mostly hear about very specific cases like Flint, Michigan, and the water issues with the lead. Um, and we hear about very specific things that come up in the news. I
Mhm.
wouldn't say I have a direct experience of seeing that level of what you're talking about, of deprivation of an area. But we do have some deprivation in the UK,
Mhm.
but I don't think it's quite as intense as some of the things I've heard from friends who moved to America, or colleagues who work in America.
Yeah, probably not because the UK is like the size of a state basically. Like you're very packed in, you know, over there. The main thing I'm referring to here is like it's like this the drive-by states. That's what they're called, sort of derivatively here in America, where you have entire like millions of acres, just like hundreds of thousands of square miles that you can drive through, where every city is exactly the same. They're all like highway offshoots that have sorry, flyover states, not drive-by. They're all highway offshoots that have like the litany of mandatory fast food chains and like your Walmart and your Best Buy, and everything's just sort of like the gray blob. Yeah, they're all ugly and boring, no culture, just the same base utilitarian capitalist consumptive model that is bowled over literally probably like 90% of the landmass in this country. And most of the cities are getting so packed, they're getting unlivable too. I feel like all the best places to live these days are like big-ish towns that are adjacent to mega cities, and that's like the place to be right now. But that's like 5% of the population of the country, and everyone else is, even the people in those places, are complaining about where they live all the time. Um, Nobody
Sound
has a
too
hometown.
That doesn't sound too dissimilar to what we call satellite towns in the UK.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, there you go.
where I live in Coventry is considered like a satellite town to, or a satellite city to Birmingham, because Birmingham is one of the larger cities in the UK, and a lot of jobs are there, and Coventry is maybe a 30 to 45-minute drive away, depending on where in Birmingham you're trying to get to.
Hmm.
Incredibly reasonably close, and yet considered an entirely different city. And so people kind of live here, or in nearby towns and cities like Warwick and Leamington, to commute into Birmingham. And the same is true around London, and the same is true, I imagine, around Manchester. And so it's, yeah, I think this idea that people tend to now want to live not necessarily in those megacities, but near them is not far off the mark.
Yeah, I want your personal opinion on this really quick before we get back to the main track, I guess. Okay, so nowadays, due to a wide variety of factors, there are now a bunch of traditionalists who jerk themselves raw to the idea of living as like a feudal serf. I swear they love this. The idea of like the traditionalist, like returning to the sort of industrial model. From the Unabomber, the Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. And what I'm curious is, because your work is relevant to this topic specifically, um, do you think that the older model of human social organization, villages, like feudal Europe, you'd have villages of like hamlets of a few hundred, villages of maybe 1,000 to 2,000, and everyone knew everyone, and there'd be a local blacksmith and stables and all that. Do you think that system, flawed as it was, did a significantly better job of meeting our social needs than our current highly atomized, highly industrialized social structure?
Yeah, I would say probably. I'm a scientist, so I tend to couch most of my statements in probably, or it's entirely likely, or the evidence would suggest this. So take this with a pinch of salt. But I would say, yeah, it would seem that would be the case. The way that you would be organized. I think, to go back to the numbers that I was talking about, the whole 5, 15, 50 thing. Something to note is that it's been found that it only takes about a year of
Mhm.
not seeing someone and not interacting with them, sort of re-upping your connection with them, for them to slowly fall out of like, kind of to move away a level. So it can be, if someone's your best closest friend and you don't see them for a year, there's about a 15% chance of them falling out of that 5 and becoming part of 15 and then continuing.
Man,
And
you can really feel that too, can't you? Like when you've been really man, because I felt this recently too. Like when you have like a really close friend and they used to be like buddy with you, and then like things get busy, someone moves away, you talk for a bit, and then you meet up with them again like a while later, like a year or so later, and it feels like there's this impermeable barrier. Now sometimes you can go just right back to it, and that's great, but sometimes it just feels like there's this barrier that you can't overcome anymore. Like there's some transient property of friendship that's been lost between the two of you. That's really sad. I feel like yeah, academically speaking, I think that fucking sucks, bro. You know?
Absolutely, like that. But the thing is that's precisely what my kind of research is looking to understand, is that the chemical kind of basis of that feeling of bondedness. So part of it comes from the kind of the body's opioid system, and some people have heard about oxytocin and dopamine, and maybe opioids in terms of like the reward pathways, especially social bonding. And I think oxytocin has been given way too much clout in all of this. It definitely plays a role, but it seems to be the only thing that's being spoken about.
Wait, could you repeat? I'm sorry,
oxytocin. It's sometimes touted in the media, like usually in news articles, as like the love hormone. And it definitely shouldn't be that, because the more recent research that's kind of less, that's come out in the last 5 years has shown that a lot of the older research is probably underpowered, or even possibly kind of has paradoxical findings, or there's like a file draw problem. So people have been doing like 5 studies and publishing 2 of them. 2 of them had positive results and 3 of them didn't. That kind of problem. And that's could be a problem with science overall, and it's slowly changing to an open kind of model. But that seems to have led to this idea that oxytocin is the big boy in all of this.
Gotcha. So MDMA is not the solution to our increasingly lonely society.
No, it definitely isn't. Right. MDMA is like a very, very specific drug, and it would be like saying that kind of heroin or cocaine is also not the answer, even though that they release these kind of chemicals. Well, cocaine stops the reuptake of them, in the same way that, say, SSRIs for antidepressants. So cocaine is sort of that jacked up on steroids for multiple different neurotransmitters, neurochemicals.
Yeah, we have I mean, you probably know this. We have like an incredible opioid crisis going on in the country right now.
Absolutely. So that is actually somewhat at the core of my work, and actually informs a lot of what I'm looking at. So I'm actually looking at new opioids. So things like heroin, and how these opioids influence our sense of bondedness. So the body naturally releases these opioids through endorphins. These are things that give you the runner's high. If you do exercise and stuff like that, you feel really good. That's your body naturally releasing this chemical. Now, it's been it's been sort of said over the course of the last few decades that social bonding is sort of just like an addiction to a person almost. And this is why, if you don't, and you can sort of, thankfully, usually not acclimatize to that, and you can have as much of that kind of addiction as you could possibly want. But sometimes people need their own space, and they've kind of had too much of that. They've sort of re-upped too frequently, and they're now slightly less receptive to it. And then it'll be a while, and then they'll come back, and boom, they're receptive to it again.
Do you think that there's do you feel like there's almost I feel like I see this a lot when I see like news reports on evolving studies with regards to biology and neurology. I feel like there's this gamification almost of our sort of social and mental faculties that can make it difficult to kind of abstract what we're talking about. So when you say like addicted to a person, so addiction, I mean, that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It also has, I think, an inherently negative implication to a lot of people. because addiction, tends to, tends to be a very bad thing. Um,
Even in the psychology community, like addiction is intrinsically bad because it inhibits your ability to do other things or live a normal
okay,
life. So
okay.
I was sort of saying it more of a tongue-in-cheek kind of way.
Okay. Just to clarify, because I'm not sure. So yeah, that makes sense to me when you say that, when you're using it, like in the context of it being a generally negative thing. I don't know if there's been a move away from that. Because there are some like enlightened, methamphetamine users out there who will happily inform you that actually you're addicted to lots of things. You're addicted to happiness. Why can't I have? So I'm just clarifying what we're talking about. The opioid epidemic, the methamphetamine epidemic in this country. I don't know what the situation is in the United Kingdom. I don't know what crazy highs you guys are chasing right now, sort of collectively as a culture. But the opioid crisis has been hitting like the aforementioned flyover states the worst, the places where people are economically disenfranchised, where there's very little culture where they live. And it's incredible because, like you say, sort of addicted to friendship. They are literally trying to compensate for a social deficiency in many cases, I think, with another sort of chemical substitute. And obviously, it doesn't really work out that great. But
It's not a different chemical substitute. It's actually almost the same chemical substitute. So, the opioids that they're addicted to, so there's multiple types of opioids, but the mu opioids is what they're addicted to. Oxycodone, morphine, heroin, that's what they want. And that's what the body sort of produces in very small quantities when you're having these social interactions. And it's sort of, imagine a bell curve or an inverted U shape, where having too little of that in your system makes you sort of avoid social contact, and having too much in that system makes you entirely indifferent to other people.
yeah,
And then there's like kind of middle zone, which is perfect, and you're bonding optimally. And the average person might be somewhere in that middle zone, not necessarily right bang in the middle, but somewhere in this optimal zone. Whereas someone who's taking these opioids suddenly has way too much activation of these opioid receptors in their brain. And suddenly they become completely and totally socially indifferent because they're getting their hit um, from the opioids externally. These exogenous is what it's called, these external opioids, instead of getting the hit from within.
right.
And as a result, you might, I don't know if you've ever been around people who have opioid addictions, but when they've taken those opioids, they probably couldn't be fussed whether you were there or not. You are irrelevant to them.
Oh yeah. They don't give a single shit like in the world at all. I've never been around a person who's been high on OxyContin or whatever, but I know there are comparable experiences. I think that I can sort of synthesize.
So you don't find this is the case with other drugs, so like with something like cocaine and amphetamines, which tend to be far more dopaminergic, or like dopamine releasing chemicals, or kind of that leads to more dopamine in the system.
Mm-hmm.
But that leads to you wanting to do things, and also leads to addiction far more easily, because dopamine and opioids are two sides of the same coin when it comes to reward. The one side is I want to do this again, and the other side is I really like this. And you can have one without the other. You can really like something and then not want to do it again, and you can really want something without liking it. And the dopamine is that I want to do this again, and the opioid is I really like this.
Yeah. So just to clarify, for chat's purposes, we are not advocating for drug consumption here on this stream. Obviously, is that correct? We're saying this is bad. We shouldn't be addicted to heroin.
Oh, sure. Like it absolutely and totally ruins. It basically makes you even more lonely, because not only will it, like when you're taking them, push you one side of this inverted U or this bell curve. Once you're coming off of them and your body's kind of acclimatized to this level of opioids in its system, it now becomes even harder to reach that middle ground. So you're now way to the left instead of way to the right of this bell curve. And so you now become sort of socially isolated, and not really having your social avoidance system sort of kick in. And it can affect your immune system, making you feel ill unless you're getting that hit. And so the only way for you to feel your new normal is now to take these drugs, and then suddenly you've hit the cycle of addiction. And that can be really, really difficult to get out of.
Yeah, it feels like there are a lot of very baseline human needs that a lot of people aren't getting met that we're trying to compensate for chemically. I really do wonder how much that was the case back in the pre-industrial era. Obviously, we don't have the research, the data, and we didn't have the drugs back then, at least not to the same extent that we have now. But I am curious, if even if we go really far back, like how much depression would hunter-gatherer societies have meaningfully experienced? You know, how much schizophrenia, how much chronic loneliness, how much anxiety, and it seems in all likelihood probably less than we have today, given the fact that rates today are higher than they ever have been in recorded, human history. I doubt anything has changed between now and then that would have lowered the rates, except for maybe agriculture. But it is sad, and I think, and that's one of the reasons why I think what you do is important, because the sociological analysis isn't enough when we're talking about a failure to meet basic foundation level physiological necessities for the human body. And we need to approach it a little more medically. I think loneliness is as much a medical issue as it is a social one.
Yeah, and I want to, before moving back to kind of the crux of coming back to capitalism and incels, I want to finish on sort of this point, which is these opioids, or kind of having this optimal level of opioid kind of activation in the brain is sort of key to social behaviors being optimal, or at least not necessarily optimal, but what is largely considered normal. So one of the things that some people think, at least a subtype of, say, autism, and I know that you are autistic, but a subtype of autism, some people think that it's leads, for lower functioning autistic people, they think it's to do with having a huge imbalance, especially with self-injurious behavior. So people who people who have really low level autism who self-injure, it could be because they have this huge imbalance of opioids in their system, and like almost too low, and so, or possibly too high, and so the only way that they can feel something is to injure themselves.
Is that something autistic people typically do?
No, but a small subset of autistic people do have self-injurious behavior, not like the cutting that you might see in some people who are depressed, but
like hitting your head against stuff, right? That's a
exactly,
yeah. Okay,
exactly.
I've heard that one. Because when I think of self harm, I think of cutting. That's the go to. But I've never associated that with autistic people. But I do associate sort of with autistic people. Maybe I'm being a little crass here with like frustratedly slamming your forehead into a wall. I think everyone hits their head against walls, like as a kid, maybe, like, I don't know. I think everyone kind of does that. Maybe like if you do it more than usual. Or maybe I'm autistic, so maybe nobody does that except us. Whatever the
Apparently did it as a child. My mom told me that I used to bang my head. So maybe, either maybe I've got undiagnosed autism, entirely possible, or maybe it is more frequent.
there is a strong evolutionary benefit to forehead calluses. I think maybe just trying to build those up could save your life one day. I think that's just common foresight. I don't think there's anything to do with autism there.
To bring it back to the question you asked about kind of what it was like.
Please bring us back. Yes.
So you were saying, kind of talking about hunter-gatherers and what their levels of kind of mental health issues might be. And I was actually reading yesterday, I think it was, that even the Egyptians, kept notes of like about 3,900-year-old hieroglyphs that we can find when they're talking about certain disorders, depression, and their talk about depression seems eerily familiar. They talk about kind of loss of faith in others, pessimism, the inability to do daily tasks, and constant consideration of suicide. And this is something that they've been talking about almost 4,000 years ago. So depression definitely existed in these feudal / kind of older societies, but possibly, in terms of the rates, we can't know.
Yeah, maybe, hey, for all we know, the agricultural revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. Maybe we all should just be running around naked, throwing rocks at deer. No, I like my video games.
Yeah. And then to bring that entirely back to the kind of social atomization thing before we lead into the incels, kind of capitalism, as I mentioned before, kind of it really incentivizes moving around and the isolation of the individual. You've spoken about it before in the past, but I kind of touched on it about university, but then you expanded on that about moving to different cities for work. And so if we go back to what I was talking about this losing people in your social support level, so like 5, 15, 50, if you're not seeing them because you've moved, then the social support that you would have had is now gone. So that's one way that you can possibly lead to depression and other issues of loneliness. The second is that it creates social isolation. So social isolation is obviously being by oneself physically. And I think I tried to make the distinction earlier, but I didn't quite get out what I wanted. And so loneliness is sort of the discrepancy between what you want to have in your social life and what you do have / what you do feel. And it's just this discrepancy, that's what causes loneliness.
Yeah. There's actually, before we get to the incel stuff specifically, there's one actually specific question I have for you. Because I've talked about this on stream before. And look, I'm not a philosopher. I'm a sociologist, or at least, there's a piece of paper that says I am. And so I come at things from a very particular angle. But I have depression. I have manic depression as a part of being bipolar. And it's very, very chemical. It doesn't really relate that much to my environment. So I don't think that this is a broader social issue. It's purely in the ballpark of what you would do. But it gets me thinking about depression in general. There's a Greek philosopher who I'm a big fan of called Epicurus. And he was interested in finding what made humans happy. And essentially, to sort of boilerplate, summarize this, was he believed humans were most happy when we lived in tight sort of communal groups of perhaps up to a dozen people in a household, or in a larger facility, where people would have private spaces for private time and shared spaces for shared time. And that would be part of like a broader, sort of village setting. He thought that the communal element of life was essential to living. And that makes me think, in a post-capitalist society, and it's all going to come crashing down one day or another, do you think we might be able to explore the potential of communal living to sort of replicate the social benefits of pre-modern human organization while maintaining our highly advanced, geopolitical and technological frameworks, with all the video games and stuff that we have come to love and enjoy over the past few decades?
I would like to hope so. So, unfortunately, humans are primates. We are monkeys who like to wear clothes, is how I sometimes phrase it. And, unfortunately, as a result, we're not always logical. So sometimes emotion beats logic. And so while I would hope that we get to that stage where we can live in these communal societies where, I think Epicurus talks about kind of having that friend, that friend that you live with, but also your partner, and kind of it's very much a social community as opposed to living in a very atomized, I have my partner and our kids and that's it in these four walls, which kind of, to go on a slight tangent, is really helpful to capitalism because they can market, instead of having one hammer for a whole group of people, it's one hammer per household and they can sell more. So, I mean, there's that whole shtick of it as well, of the social atomization is actually perfect for capitalism, not only for the purposes of making you a worker robot, but also the more atomized you are, the more things they can sell.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get to build more houses that way, and it's the same basic philosophy as planned obsolescence. It used to be back in the 40s and 50s. Factories would pop out toasters and ovens. They live forever. They'll outlive us. And now everything's crap and breaks down in less than a decade, and you get to sell more of it, and it operates in the same basic principle. Any way in which they get to subdivide the commodities they produce, because otherwise, we come up against overproduction as a sort of inevitable, death knell for capitalism. What need is there for a hammer factory when everyone already has hammers? There's no, we're done. We've got it. We have all the hammers humanity will need, bar a few thousand more per year for a very long time. But you've got to keep selling hammers, so you find ways, You get the
Oh,
kid's hammer and the girl hammer with the pink handle with the little rubber, you know. You got the baby hammer. It's got like the little kid toy plastic stuff. You know, you got to diversify.
and that's, yeah, that's exactly it. So to kind of wrap this bit up and move on to incels, I guess the main thing that I can say is with regard to social optimization, capitalism does a very good job of it, and I don't want to encourage the doomers out there. So there are ways of trying to fight it. You know, going out and finding people with similar interests or similar backgrounds to you, making your own community. If you don't have a family, try and find one of your own. You know, there's a real sense of closeness that can happen, not just because you're blood relatives with someone, but because you happen to have shared experiences. And for some people, that takes going to music festivals or gigs or book clubs. And for other people, it can be church. And there's something called Sunday assemblies as well, which is like secular church. Completely and totally non-religious, but similar rituals, where you kind of, instead of singing hymns, you sing U2's It's a Beautiful Day, and instead of a sermon, it's a TED Talk, but very similar. But whatever it is you're doing, find a group of people, if you are able to help kind of build those systems of close-knit communities for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's not being made easy for us, but I stress this every time. I know sometimes it may feel like there's no way. Okay, so wait, some of you are just fucked, okay? If you're working 3 jobs and you've got a kid, you've got no fucking free time. I'm so sorry. Good luck, you know? But for a lot of us, we do have free time. If you're watching my stream right now, you probably do have some free time in your life. You should spend as much of that free time as possible watching me and donating to me. But if you're not doing those things, you know, there are websites out there, lots of them, that organize and collect and tally local meetup sites, places you can hang out. You can search by hobby, you know, number of people going. These are all things. I did this in LA. I found a hiking group. I found a live art drawing group. You know, there are game tournament groups. You know, you'll go play some Smash in someone's garage if you really want to. There is so much stuff that you can go do. This is independent of you being in school or going to work. You can find these places, and all you got to do is go there. Don't be a fucking weirdo, and just try to communicate. Be friendly. That's it. Don't go over there looking to fuck, okay? The pussy smashing happens later. Just chill out, and if you do that, Godspeed. Friendship will follow. I promise. Okay? That's it. I'm just, people, no doomering here, okay? We got to be uplifting about this.
Yeah, and if you are thinking about the sex side of things, then kind of sex is a side effect of doing these things and turning up and finding someone you happen to like, because, you know, if you make a connection with someone, sometimes that connection becomes intimate, and that's okay, but don't go there expecting sex. You know, that's a direct way not only isolating yourself further, because you've now kind of stopped yourself from going to that community, but you've also kind of possibly got the wrong intention of going there, and you possibly got the wrong end of the stick of what this social bonding is. Social bonding talks about everything from bonding with, you know, someone you may want to have sex with, but also just pure platonic friendships.
Yeah, 100. Yeah, absolutely. You can go. It, generally speaking, unless you're being very utilitarian about it, the more direct you are in pursuing something, the harder it'll be when it comes to like sort of fulfilling a social goal. If you go to an event looking to make a friend, it'll be a little weird. Like, you'll kind of rub people off the wrong way. You know, don't do that. If you go to a place looking for a relationship, like, that's even worse. Like, it just doesn't work that way. The only time you can be that direct is if you're going to, like, you know, the S&M fuck club, where you show up in gimp and your dick's hanging out, and then you can, like, maybe if you go there looking for sex, maybe, yeah, sure, because everyone's there for the same thing. But a lot of people are going to these live art drawing classes to do live art drawing. A lot of people are going to hiking clubs to hike. Until you know everyone else's intentions, you can't be clear. So you just want to be friendly, want to get along with folks. If they like you, then you can put on your gimp later. All right, sorry, just trying to expel the doomer vibes from chat.
Exactly, and I was hoping to do the same, because it isn't all kind of end of times here. You know, but yes, capitalism is, but there are ways that we can sort of try and make it work for us and encourage the movement towards a post-capitalistic society where everyone isn't doomers and thus can be optimistic and create a better society.
Yeah, 100%. And we have to do that, by the way, because not narcissism, negativity doesn't propel positive social change. Being upset with a system does not fix the system. But learning to live with the system, negative as it is, and we are undoubtedly in a negative system, socially speaking, can give us helpful insights into finding ways to improve that system, So, yeah. My friend, my colleague in this moment, how do you feel about incels? What do you got going on in your PhD brain on that particular subject?
So to me, kind of incels is preying on these people who are already lonely. So you now have a group of disaffected individuals who are lonely, and so they're looking for a group of people. And in her video on incels, ContraPoints, I think, albeit briefly, talks about kind of digital self-harm. And one thing that people don't necessarily, well, probably do know about opioids that I've been talking about is that it leads to this kind of sense of pain relief. That's why they give you morphine after surgery. Why some people take heroin and codeine or all sorts of drugs. Initially, they get addicted because they started off as painkillers. And this digital self-harm aspect of it all is really quite interesting to me because kind of a lot of people who are lonely seem to have altered pain responses. And this is seen in depression as well. You have very altered, or at least a subset of those with depression have an altered pain response. And so if you're already lonely, then this active digital self-harm can be sort of a way of getting that hit of opioids. Like one of the things that people don't know about is that social rejection causes the release of pain, like these endorphins. So it feels like physical pain to you when you are socially rejected. And so things like Reddit's Roast Me subreddit, people actively seeking out this almost digital self-harm possibly stems from this same kind of thrill of getting that rush and hit from being kind of talked down to and having that digital self-harm.
Yeah, I think that was one of the most insightful things that Contra said in that particular video. The most insightful thing she said to me was the relationship she pointed out between the incel communities and some of the more toxic trans communities that she had been a part of. Because the incel communities, they'll post pictures of their faces. Oh, how over is it for me? Knowing the comments will be telling them they're disgusting. It's over for you, my dude. They'll lavish in their self-misery. And some of these more toxic trans communities are, at least according to Contra, I haven't, delved into them myself, are just as self-hating. Or they'll post pictures of themselves knowing that all the other people in the forum are going to say they don't pass or whatever. That they'll put each other down in every conceivable fashion. And for a lot of people, yeah, like you say, the sort of chemical reward you get for this misery is in a way better than the sort of empty bleakness of feeling negative about yourself but not having any place to bounce that off.
And this is compounded by the fact that when people are emotional distress, depression being one of those things, decision making acts very differently to how it would when you're not depressed. I'm sure a lot of people are aware of that if you've ever suffered with depression. I have, and the decision to commit suicide, for example, isn't seems incredibly rational at the time, but then if you don't do it, you look back and like, what on earth was I thinking about? There is the way that you come to a decision-making process, or the way you approach that decision-making process, changes when your emotion is changed, and and this is shown by multiple pieces of evidence in the academic literature. But one thing that I found very interesting is that when you've got kind of very serious, kind of deadly diseases, so things like cancer, people are really likely to kind of change their belief systems or head to belief systems, and they may lean on them as a crutch, kind of not just as a crutch, but they may lean on them as a crutch to try and kind of cater to that negativity that they're feeling, but often do it in a way that actually reinforces that negative feeling in them. And so this is, again, to go back to that ContraPoints video, because I did think there were parts of it which are really interesting. But she was saying, there's this death cult that does catastrophizing, and this catastrophizing, kind of the kind of anxiety-based stuff, where first X is going to happen, then Y, and which means Z is going to happen, and it continues down this chain until eventually I should lay down and rot. Right, like this is this.
Right. Yeah. The LDAR. Yeah.
Yeah. And this whole aspect of this catastrophizing linked with linked with the idea that they are inherently bad, nothing will ever improve. This belief system that is preyed on and then leaned on. They can't then get out of it without ease.
I feel like a fundamental belief in one's ability to improve themselves is a really essential component of mental wellness. Usually sort of complacency in that regard, I think, leads people down really, really bad roads. Now, a lot of people can't improve themselves. A lot of people, just speaking frankly, are fucking disasters and will be their whole lives, But and Godspeed to them. I'm not shit talking. I'm just saying, like, it's factually, empirically, they're going to be disasters. But believing that you can continue to move forward is the best way to avoid being in that state. And if you are in that state, believing you can't move forward will usually lead to you receding rather than sort of staying where you are. But you can never talk to these people about that. And that's what I find so frustrating about the incel thing, You can't talk to incels about any of their problems because they have mimeticized all of the common counter arguments, like for example, like, hey, you want to go make more friends? Have you considered, like, taking more care of yourself? Yeah, I'll just go shower. I'll just go shower, and then as soon as I exit the shower, I will be slathered in tits. Naturally, yeah, that's how it works. But and then, like, oh, I get it. They're making fun of it because saying just take a shower is really reductive. But then you actually meet some of these people, and a lot of them really do smell like shit. So, like, actually, yeah, some of you should probably fucking shower. Just a little hint there. So it feels like the dismissal works for the people who actually have taken the advice and it didn't work. But I'd be willing to bet almost none of them have taken all of the advice and found none of it worked. But they make the memes about how it doesn't work, and then everyone who hasn't taken any of that advice just lives with it, assuming it wouldn't work anyway. And then there you go. You don't have to try because trying won't work, and it won't work because there's no reason you should try. And then you just live in a perpetual cyclical Ouroboros of self-destruction until you inevitably kill yourself or shoot up your school,
And I think part of this is exacerbated by the desire to have instantaneous results, right? Like the idea that, yes, I'll just shower and suddenly all of my dreams will come true. No one is even saying that. That's obviously a complete caricature of what people are telling them to do. It should be, if you do X, if you do Y, and if you do Z, then, over the course of a number of weeks and months, your situation may improve to the point where now you're getting friends and you're getting into social situations which are beneficial for you.
Yeah, shower and you won't smell like shit. That's the sort of general advice there. And that may help you down the line, Very few situations where smelling like shit helps you.
It's like brush your teeth and your teeth won't fall out later. Not brushing your teeth once won't cause your teeth to instantly fall out. But if you continue to not brush your teeth, that will cause them to fall out. And so if you continue to not do the behaviors over time, that will be a problem. But also, if you have neglected brushing your teeth for a couple of years and then you brush your teeth once, that's not going to magically fix your teeth.
Nope, no, it will not.
And this is why you need to have this sustained thing. And unfortunately, this meaning that they've been doing of, I'll just shower, it really also reinforces the idea that other people are expecting them to get better overnight, when I don't think anyone outside of their kind of incel circle is ever considering that it will change overnight magically. Personality development or kind of just personal hygiene development or anything for that matter takes time to become kind of not part of your new normal.
Yeah, my beautiful and well endowed girlfriend just made a great point in chat, which is where she said, immediate gratification is a big part of the manic pixie dream girl trope. Men get a girl who make them feel validated and exciting without putting the effort in. Same with isekai shit. Do you know? Wait, really quick. Do you know isekai, like the anime genre?
I don't.
Yeah, it's a genre where the basic gist of it is that you die. Not always, but the basic gist of it is that you die and you're resurrected in another world, and the world is usually like a video game world. It's like you get to go into a video game, basically. It's a very popular genre, and it's mostly trash, and it mostly appeals to people who are very, very lonely, who are fail sons and worthless, because they imagine that if they were only in like Baldur's Gate universe, that they would be infinitely powerful and they would have all the boobies on their face. But it's totally right, because in both cases, I'm sorry.
Right. This is the power fantasy of video games. It gives you, I love playing games like Civilization and things like that, because for me, that gives you this ability to almost play God for an entire civilization, entire history. That's a very power-inducing thing, and that can be the kind of thing that's really nice. Or power leveling in an RPG, another thing that I like to do.
That's the thing. I love power fantasies. I think power fantasies are great, A good story about like a shonen anime, a good story about a character from plucky beginnings fighting for, their whole life, and eventually they achieve their goal and they're strong, and it's very, but they realize the real goal was the friends they made along the way. Yeah, I like that. I think that's good. But what the isekai genre and what the magic pixie dream girl genre do in particular is that they afford the gratification to the man before the man undergoes that self-improvement arc. The Manic Pixie Dream Girl doesn't come along after the guy has fixed his life around. The Manic Pixie Dream Girl comes along to help the guy fix his life around. The isekai shit usually begins with the protagonist having a bunch of buxom young women dancing around them. It doesn't end with it. And I think that's really indicative of what we're talking about with this whole incel, just shower, just brush your teeth, lol, that's going to help me kind of thing, where they're only capable of believing in the efficacy of advice that will immediately reward them with the affection and interest that they're interested in. But they're utterly uninterested in the process of working towards it, because they've convinced themselves that it's pointless, it's worthless,
Yeah, and to use their terminology, like the Chad doesn't have to have this process; they just automatically get the win, right? They kind of get out of bed completely and totally unshowered themselves, but suddenly still get the girl because Chadkin.
Yeah, the Chad just rolls out of bed and walks through the door, and instantly he is assailed with sexual gratification. And frankly, there are some people like that. It is true. But most people aren't like that. Most people have to try. And even if everyone else was like that, just because everyone else has it easier than you doesn't mean you shouldn't fucking try. Jesus Christ. Can you imagine? It's funny, because I bet a lot of the people who believe this, like, why even try? Everyone else can just do it instantly. I have to. A lot of these people are probably the same ones who impugn like the African American community for their socioeconomic disadvantage, and when reminded that there are reasons for it, they're like, well, just because they were slaves doesn't mean they can't work to catch up or something, because it tends to accompany conservative social views. I guarantee you they simultaneously hold these two beliefs.
It's entirely possible. I am not an expert on the incels.
Yeah, sorry, every one of them,
But I think it's a very interesting topic. It's the kind of thing that I would probably, before I spoke way too much on it, want to do a whole bunch of my own research, kind of on the sociology of it all and the psychology of it all. But from what my understanding is, it's this kind of, the idea is that it's like the digital self-harm aspect of it is what kind of instantly speaks to me, and this whole catastrophizing aspect, because both of those things kind of relate to my psychology background and cognitive neuroscience background, but that's obviously my bias showing.
Yeah, well, but your field is going to be really important. It's eventually, because right now we're on the cusp of it. I don't know if you're following the DNC debates at all with our upcoming presidential election, but we're
I
really. I'm
follow
sorry.
very closely because the American president kind of sets the tone for
Yeah, yeah,
conversations.
yeah. Yeah, no, no, yeah, undeniably, we're very powerful. But there's a lot of discussion, at least in the DNC debate, with sort of like people's wellness, like healthcare, like people of we're looking to address like student debt, and these things are sort of tangential, but eventually we're going to have to directly address the mental health crisis. Eventually, probably in the next 10 years, a presidential candidate is going to start talking about the epidemic of depressions, anxiety, suicides, what have you, mostly white men here in America. That is a real thing. And when that happens and people start really paying attention to this, your field is going to be at the forefront of addressing solutions to the way in which we're currently living. And the first 20 years we talk about this, it's probably going to be a bunch of bullshit meandering where the media talks about whether or not video games are to cause for kids increasing depression or some shit. But eventually we're going to settle on an answer. So when that happens, like this is primo content,
Oh, I mean, that's really great to hear. I mean, I've just sent you a link. You can look at it in your own time. It's a paper that I've just had published of mine, talking about the causes of certain mental health disorders and how, under Obama, kind of in 2013 or so, the National Institute of Mental Health issued this kind of directive to the world to say, please help us understand possible causes of mental health because how we're currently addressing it isn't working.
What does endogenous mean?
Endogenous means like from the inside. So there's exogenous, which is from the outside, and endogenous is from the inside.
Gotcha.
So from like endogenous is from your own body, and then exogenous would be, for example, taking a drug of some kind, cocaine.
This really was just published. This is 2020. Nice. How long did you and your co-researchers work on this?
So I actually started writing it possibly in the tail end of 2018. There was a really great neuroscientist and psychologist, Carmine Oriente, who's worked for a couple of decades on immune research and the role of immunity on mental health problems. But kind of there's never been this kind of explanatory factor of why does immunity seem to lead to these diseases? Is it just something to do with the immune system? And like this is me pulling together, doing a massive literature review, kind of suggesting that at least for a subtype of depression, a subtype of schizophrenia, and for some types of autism, that these opioids, these opioids probably do play a role.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, absolutely. I'd be interested in taking a look at that. Obviously you probably use a lot of terminology I'm not that familiar with, but be worth giving a look.
There's a Reddit post that someone made, and they asked me to kind of TLDR about it, and I can send you that if you want. Because
yes, that I think that chat and I would both benefit from that very much.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it very quickly, but it's it's like they said, like explain like I'm 10/TLDR, and I kind of tried to run it down in a few points. They then asked about questions about sort of drug development and things like that, and it's really interesting. Currently, anti-inflammatories are under researched, but they are kind of getting research done at the moment, and also opioid blockers, something like naltrexone, which is currently prescribed to people to stop addiction, so both opioid addiction and alcohol addiction. It's early research with naltrexone in the 80s showed some success, but back then we viewed depression as this kind of unitary disorder. So imagine thinking of diabetes all as one thing. And
I mean, is it not? I don't know.
there's two types of diabetes. There's diabetes type 1 and diabetes type 2.
Nothing makes me happier than knowing that there are experts out there that know things I don't know and that I don't ever need to know because it's their job and not my job. That is very precious to me. I will say though, with regards to depression specifically, the distinction between typical clinical depression and manic depression is pretty severe. I think there's a pretty huge gulf between those two things, and I guess and the gulf between those two things was the only reason that I was correctly diagnosed with bipolar disorder rather than incorrectly diagnosed with just regular clinical depression. And it was because of that I was able to get the medication that I needed. So that's a huge benefit, because regular clinical depression, that's SSRI territory. Manic depression is more mood stabilizer territory. It's a very...
And this is, I would say again, like this is almost a misconception, unfortunately, among society, where things are sort of slowly seeping out over time, and so the public sort of has a view of 10 years old about what the academics are thinking. And so, like depression, we currently call depression. It's almost as if you called a stomach ache. If anyone who had a stomach ache, no matter what the cause was, you just called it the tummy problem. At the moment, you have the sadness disease. You are sad, but we don't know what's causing it. And so it could be that it's serotonin for some people, and it could be that it's opioids for some people, and it could be an entirely different cause for other people. And understanding what the actual cause is might better help us give the correct drug to some people. Think about it like, some people who have IBS, some people have Crohn's disease, and some people just have lactose intolerance. All three of those things can lead to, after eating certain foods, problems with your tummy. Mm-hmm. But if you just call that the tummy disease, you wouldn't really go any way to addressing it apart from maybe saying, maybe don't eat as much.
But you cannot deny there is a certain charm to the tummy disease as a sort of catch-all, medical terminology.
Yeah, exactly. But that's sort of what we've done with depression. It's just you have the sadness disease. And I think over time, like nowadays in the modern, so the DSM-5 kind of breaks that down a bit more. So you have like melancholic depression, atypical depression, major depressive disorder. So you have this breakdown a little bit more. So people do understand that there are subtypes, but still haven't got to the root cause of what each of the subtypes are. Or maybe, because at the moment we're just describing symptoms as opposed to describing the causes of those symptoms. So again, we're still at the abstract level of the sadness disease, but maybe like type 1 sadness or type 2 sadness, instead of actually saying, okay, you have a serotonin imbalance specifically, and that's why you're getting this type of sadness compared to an opioid imbalance, which is leading to this type of sadness. We don't have that level of clarity yet, and that's what we're aiming for now.
Yeah. Undeniably. So we are the degree to which we have developed an understanding of mental health disorders over the past few decades. I mean, we've come a really long way, which is, I think, really great. The discourse around this has changed a lot since I was a kid. I remember back when I was like 12 or 13, I just vaguely knew of like mental health issues, like sort of vague, othered concept that I didn't have any personal relation to. But I do know that back then people were a lot less knowledgeable than they are now, just generally speaking, even in the public discourse. Do you think that these advancements will bear fruit in a broader policy or social sense anytime soon? Do you think we're going to see politicians actively advocating for better mental health services rather than just using it as sort of like a scapegoat to avoid talking about gun control? Do you think, well, that's an American problem right there, not for you guys?
The answer is it depends on the politicians who are in charge. Like, so if someone like Bernie Sanders in America became president, I think you would find that they would take very active measures and really take to heart the science. Because I mean, this man has been thinking about, he's been on the right side of history for decades, right? Like, he was fighting for women's rights and LGBT rights in the 60s. And so this man definitely has a high advocacy level for actual policy that makes effective change. Whereas if you have someone like in our country, you have David Cameron as the Conservative leader, then Theresa May, they used the kind of the mental health things need to improve, whilst cutting nurses, cutting back funding to social programs that lead to kind of the youth programs that foster mental health. All of these things, they massively cut funding to them, and but like on the one hand, and then on the other hand, they say, "Oh, we're all for positive mental health stuff," and it doesn't kind of coincide with reality. Whereas I feel like someone like Bernie Sanders or someone like AOC, for example, she's more likely to, especially coming from a younger generation who grew up with more media that demonstrated people who had mental health difficulties. I think that conversation will massively shift and actions will be taken. So I think it depends entirely on which political parties are in power in their country.
So what I'm taking from this is you are officially endorsing Bernie Sanders as your preferred presidential candidate for the 2020 presidential election. Is that correct?
I couldn't agree more. Like Bernie Sanders is, for the most part, he is kind of center left as far as like British people are kind of British leftists, I suppose. Like he's fantastic in everything that he wants, and I wish that we had someone like him in the UK. Like Jeremy Corbyn was not dissimilar in some ways, but kind of did not have any kind of the kind of political wherewithal to actually create the grassroots movement that Bernie has.
Yeah, Bernie has an actual genuine shot right now at the presidency, and it seems like Corbyn made a lot of sort of tactical fuck ups in his run, kind of, you know.
Was incredibly inefficacious. The man kind of had his heart in the right place, but had so many faults and refused to acknowledge them. He just assumed that because his heart was in the right place, that everything would fall in line and things would get better. You know, I don't want to digress too much into politics.
No, of course.
That's sort of kind of the difference, I think, between an active politician. So, but someone like him might have said that he wanted to help mental health, but may not have done something as actively because he was politically inefficacious. Whereas Bernie Sanders and people like Bernie Sanders can create that grassroots movement. People like AOC are helping, him drum up support. So while he's doing in the impeachment trial, she's going out to Iowa and she's driving up that grassroots support to create this mass movement of people who will then encourage movement on the mental health problems, on clearing up the opioid crisis, on Bernie Sanders has specifically mentioned kind of the kind of sicknesses of loneliness or disorders of despair, he calls them. And that's entirely related to this opioid crisis, and that's entirely related to huge amounts of debts leading to stress, leading to downstream problems because stress leads to basically the release.
I mean, stress will kill you. Like it'll just dead kill you. I remember reading one time. I can't source this, but I remember reading one time that the day to day, like the stress of not knowing whether you're still going to have the job the next day, not knowing whether or not you're going to get your tax refund on time, not knowing whether or not your car's the noise your car is making means you're going to have to go in for a $600 repair. All of these little stresses that sort of afflict most Americans, because most Americans live paycheck to paycheck, like 80%. This stress is leagues beyond what we are biologically supposed to be handling. Back when we were hunter-gatherers, the only stress we experienced day to day would have been the stress of the hunt, and that was it. And it was active when we were hunting. Also, maybe sometimes the tiger eats your kids. Simple stuff. But I remember reading about this, that back then our ability to handle stress just does not serve us well in a modern environment. I think the reason for that might have been because the brain has different ways of dealing with different types of stress. Where life-threatening stress, we have certain mechanisms for defending ourselves against them, but little stressors we don't. And since most stressors we experience in the day-to-day life these days are non-life-threatening, they don't get caught by that mechanism. But again, I don't have like a source for that.
So I would say it's actually that mechanism just continuously firing. So it used to be that you might be worried about, okay, where are we foraging, or where are we going to be hunting in the next week? And as long as you have your close knit community, you have that social support, which I was talking about before. About having that social support is a protective factor against the effects of stress.
Mm-hmm.
But in modern capitalist world, you don't have that protective factor because your social support is in a different city, a different country, or you're walled off from them. Even if you're in the same city, you don't really speak to them unless you specifically go and find them, instead of coming home to your village and spending 90% of your day with your kind of immediately close-knit group of friends. So this whole social support aspect is gone, and then it leads to this loss of the protection against stress. And so instead of having this protection and also less stress, you've now got, as far as your body is concerned, every single day there is a leopard right there. You know,
Yeah.
stress. Am I going to keep my job the next day? That is, as far as your brain is concerned, as far as your body is concerned, no different to, oh my God, there is a leopard going to be right there, right now. And it leads to anxiety, because overvigilance, insomnia, and all sorts of other problems that can be caused by this stress.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we are constantly dying, is sort of the main issue now, which is not a great place to be. As a civilization, as a species, to feel like you're constantly dying. Now it seems like that stress continues even past a certain income level too. Even if you're not currently worried about your job or your or whether or not you'll be able to pay your next set of bills or anything like that, it still seems like people are pretty stress afflicted, and that probably trends more into social factors, because a lot of those upper class whites are suburbanite dipshits who live in locked away McMansions and have no idea what friendship means outside of backyard champagne parties every other month. Yeah, sorry, I'm losing my train here. I guess, holy shit, we've been talking for an hour and a half. In I guess the mind of expediency, you are the expert. I defer utterly to you. Would you like to hit me with any particularly essential or prescient topics that you think deserve to be listened to?
I think advocacy for changing people's understanding of mental health is important. So, like I said, talking about the fact that mental health, just the label itself, doesn't necessarily mean we know what's causing it. So it's important to understand that research is currently underway, and we're trying to understand better, and so things can get better in the future. So if let's say SSRIs didn't work for you and you have depression, they call that treatment-resistant depression. It's not because you're forever doomed to be depressed. It's just our current understanding of depression, or at least our current ways of treating it, haven't caught up with the most up-to-date academic research. And that will change over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, especially if people make the active change to vote in people who will make those policies appropriate to the relevant literature. Vote for people who actually listen to science. Unfortunately, people like Donald Trump and people like the Conservative Party here, they don't listen to evidence. If you look at Australia, the kind of climate change is quite clearly fueling one of the worst, sets of fires they've ever had, and yet their government refuses to acknowledge the fact that climate change is even possibly real. And you had something similar with Donald Trump refusing climate change to be real for a long time, thought it was a Chinese hoax. And so, it depends on who you vote for. If you vote for someone who's going to deny reality, then you're not going to see these changes come to fruition. If you actively vote for people who are going to make those changes in a positive way, then you'll see benefits in your life. And I think that advocacy is where we all have to start, and my role is making sure people do understand what we need to do, and then other people need to vote for people who are going to do those things.
I agree. I agree completely. We can't move forward. The Republican Party in America, presumably the Tories over yonder, the conservatives everywhere are and always have been an enemy to progress, both social and scientific. Murdoch is the only reason why we are still debating whether or not climate change is a thing, while China is actively making massive efforts to revitalize its economy in a way to minimize carbon emissions. We over here are still chimping out, throwing shit from our hands at other chimps, arguing whether or not overwhelming scientific plurality is enough to justify preventing the world from being destroyed. And likewise, we have the same for mental health. I mean, nobody cares about depressed people, I don't think, like in a political sense yet. Or at least very few people do. Obviously, Bernie cares about all of us, everyone here specifically. Bernie cares about you. And but for the most part, they don't. But that can change, and I hope that does change too. Because you're right, there is a lot of room that can be done with regards to mental health, and it's kind of crazy to me, that for a lot of, like, if I've got a tummy ache, if my fucking stomach hurts or if I've got heartburn, you can take Tums, and in 3 minutes, you'll be better. We have incredible medical technology these days. It works quickly, efficiently. Problems that were insurmountable 50 years ago are today, fairly trivial. With mental health, I feel like we've still got a long way to go. A lot of people are depressed. A lot of people have anxiety issues. I personally, like right now I take lithium for my bipolar. That's cool and great and everything. I feel like there might be a more elegant solution to my mental health issues than just eating a rock. A metal rock, though. Maybe there's some. I don't know. Maybe there is. Maybe there isn't. I just want people smarter than me to try. Like you, I guess. I guess that's your job, kind of. I mean, you're not, in the pharmaceutical industry, but still.
Yeah, no, I'm not. Like, sort of, my research is the kind of research that preempts the pharmaceutical level stuff. Like, mine is understanding how the brain actually works, and then they can then use that understanding to make things that help people, I guess, is the idea. But I think like I said, advocacy is a great place to start. So just knowing things, let's say someone is like neoliberally inclined or centrist inclined, explaining to them that depression in 2010 in America alone cost the American economy about $210 billion in missed work days. Like, if you explain to them in just monetary terms, they'll be like, oh, wow, that is a big problem. Maybe we should actually address it if we truly care about the economy. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of thing, like, you find what person someone really cares about. Like, I care about people. So if I just say, someone is hurt, someone is hurting, I want to make that better, that's enough for me to kind of want to make change. For some people, if it's not, if the economy isn't suffering, then, it's tough to do. But, for them, if you could explain that, no, the economy is massively suffering, then you should also want to make these changes, and all sorts of other economic arguments that you can make to people who are more economically inclined, and social arguments to people who are more socially inclined. But it's really important to find the kind of thing, and this is why when I first messaged you, I also spoke about rhetoric, and the kind of rhetoric that you tend to deliver, on average, is pretty damn good. You really give kind of strong advocacy and a kind of simplistic framing that really works to talk to people across political spectrums, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And this is, I mean, it's a good wedge issue too. Doesn't matter where you're conservative or liberal or whatever. Mental health issues affect all of us. Judging by the opioid crisis, it might even be, it might be hitting more conservative or rural folks, more, at least in an economic sense, more significantly than it is hitting all the queer youth who are addicted to SSRI.
I mean, it's also that troops. If people
troops too,
pro-military, then troops come back with massive mental health problems, post-traumatic stress, and things like that. Police even kind of, especially in the US, because of the amount of kind of gun crime compared to the UK. Like a police officer doesn't necessarily have to leave their kind of house in the UK and think, I might get shot today. And I think that in and of itself could possibly lead to stress and a kind of hypervigilance to the point where they go around and they might fire their firearm when they wouldn't otherwise need
to. Thank you so much for the time you've taken to share your expertise and wisdom with us. I really do appreciate it. Before you head, would you mind shouting out anything in particular you would like to shout out?
I think the first thing I would like to shout out is if anyone is feeling lonely, then go and find a group, contact someone. If you have an old friend, hit them up. Like, do anything that you can to try and ease that loneliness. Second thing I would say is that if you are feeling suicidal, if you've got to that stage, find a suicide hotline, call them, or if it's not them, find someone you can talk to, and hopefully they will be receptive and help talk you through that situation. In terms of my work, I'm currently just finishing up my PhD, so I've been doing it for 2.5 years now, hopefully finishing within 3 years, which I know in the UK that's fairly normal. In the US, PhDs tend to take 6 to 8 years, which baffles me. But I'm hoping to publish some more work. So if people do want to support my work, then they can go away and read it when it gets published. I'd happily, I'd love for people to spread that around, because again, the more people that read my work, the more people can learn about mental health, or not just mental health, but the literal underpinnings of how our brains work. And the more people know about how their brains work, the better they can do to kind of address either their own or other people's issues.
Yeah, undeniably. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Thank you for reaching out. And yeah, trans rights.
Trans rights and for you Americans, diabetes rights, and all of the rights. I can't say how much I agree with that. As a trans woman myself, I must say that it is important that trans rights are promoted.
Absolutely. Sorry, just getting a good stretch in. Have a wonderful day. Thank you again. And yeah, contact me in the future if you'd like. Please feel free.
Will do. Yeah, but and keep on doing the stuff you're doing. I've been watching your stuff on and off when I have time between PhD stuff and social life to kind of really get to grips with kind of grassroots movements in America. And I think your rhetoric is fantastic. It's actually helped me reframe my own ways of addressing topics with people I talk to in my own life. And I think I'd like to thank you for that, and keep doing what you're doing.
No problem. This was your chance to give back, and you more than did. Have a good one.